Thanks for tuning in to the Medevac podcast, powered by the Robert Irvine Foundation, whose mission is to support and strengthen the physical and mental well-being of our nation's heroes and their families. They provide them with life-changing opportunities, resources, and support through food, wellness, community, and financial support programs. I'm one of your hosts, David Reid.
And I'm your other host, Christian Meyers. I don't have to read off mine. His is a little bit more confusing. Anyways, this is the Medevac podcast. Thank you for joining us today. If you're new here, there's a price for the show. If you get something out of today's episode, you have to share it with a friend or family member. It's just the price. You have to do it. It's required. And we will check. We'll follow up.
You have to comment below. That's where we get all of our interactions from.
Yeah,
Interesting questions.
Yeah, that kind of stuff. Leave questions, comments. Let us know who you want to hear from and what type of topics you want us to talk about. Because there's a lot that goes into the Medevac podcast.
And today we have another guest from the 1-5 Marines.
Yeah.
Last guest we had was, you'll have to go back to the episode and check it out.
Major General Fred Padilla was our last guest. And now we have Sergeant Major Luke Converse. He retired, did about 26 years. He was also at 1-5. And he's part of our Reunite the Brave series that we're doing here with the podcast and with Robert Irvine Foundation, kind of a joint venture. So welcome, Luke. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Great to be here.
Yeah. Happy to be
I'm
here.
excited.
Excellent.
Back in Oceanside.
Yeah, it's great to be back to Camp Pendleton.
Yeah, it's not too bad.
Yeah,
I like it out
I have
here.
a whole new bounce in my step.
Absolutely.
Went out walking this morning and I found myself running upstairs, and I haven't done that. I don't run anymore.
Something in the air, maybe.
Right?
The energy,
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great to be back here.
Just fell right back into it. Yeah.
That's great.
Yep.
Well, let's rewind it back a little bit. So you joined in the 80s,
Mm-hmm.
right? What inspired you to join? I know it was kind of a difficult time.
Okay, yeah, it was economically, the United States wasn't very, it wasn't a good place to be.
Yeah.
But everybody said the 80s was the best.
We had great rock and roll, the
Good
best
music.
rock and roll.
Yeah.
MTV was coming out. And, we had it was a good time, but it was kind of depressed. I grew up in a very rural part of Pennsylvania on a farm, and there really weren't a lot of opportunities. Unless your dad owned the company or something like that, or, and I just wasn't ready for college at that point.
Sure.
And so, just exploring other opportunities. And my father was a Marine. He was in for 10 years. He got out towards the end of the Vietnam War. And, it was always an idea. And I can always remember I was a junior in high school, and we had a career day. And you had to go spend the day with whoever, if you wanted to be a doctor, you went spend the day with a doctor.
At the hospital, yeah.
Yep. And I didn't know what I wanted to do. I honestly didn't know what I wanted to do. And the guidance counselor, Luke, you have to decide on something. Well, I don't know. I was just being the typical teenager with an attitude. And okay, you show up tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. I show up, and the Marine recruiter was there. And the Marine recruiter got to talk to like 3 of us for the day. It kind of solidified it for me. He was a real cool guy. But I got to talk to all 4 services, and the Marines were always something special because my dad was a Marine, and I always read a lot of history, and the Marines always kind of stood out as an organization that was always asked to do too much with too little.
Mm-hmm.
And it just really just appealed to me, and I just saw it as a way to get started in life and figure out what I want to do, give me the tools I need, give me some time to grow up.
Sure.
And along the way, I just kind of fell in love with it. I didn't plan on making it a career. It kind of just happened.
Yeah.
We hear that quite often with the Marines, doing too much with too little.
Yeah.
Resourcefulness. Yes.
Yeah.
And we're kind of putting the pieces together with this is why there was such a great sense of pride in the Marines as well, with every single detail, every single uniform item as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep. It all fits together. It's almost like it's by design. It didn't happen by accident. That's for sure.
There's a sense of pride in being able to be as effective as your sister branches with a lot less at your disposal.
Yep.
Right. And I think that's where a lot of that pride with being a Marine comes.
Mhm.
But there's also a bit of I don't know, it's a little bit sadistic where they're like, yeah, I like how much it sucks. This is great.
That is
A
true.
lot of pride in it,
Yeah,
especially on
yeah.
the infantry side.
Absolutely. On the infantry side.
I went a whole month without taking a shower.
Exactly.
It's like,
yeah. It's a point of pride.
There is an interesting persona in the Marines for sure. I can't tell you how many, like, even non-combat oriented Marines that I've spoken to that are just like, I'd be sitting there with my tan beret on and they'd be like, we're much better marksmen than you. And I'm like, oh, okay. And they're like, well, yeah, Marines, are all riflemen. Yeah, and there's just this great sense of pride, which I've always loved and respected. I think that's great. How do you instill that into the men you're training?
Well, it starts, it really starts before they go to boot camp, before they even join. There's the selection process. I was a recruiter for 3 years.
Okay.
And we would, no kidding, we would have these kids thinking that they were in for like SEAL training.
Oh yeah.
And
Hardest thing
we would have these guys scared of boot camp.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how we sold the Marine Corps.
Mm-hmm.
This is going to be tough. This is going to
So
be one
you
of the toughest things you ever do.
Mhm.
But you understand how that's going to reward you. And, and there's enough young men out there that, I need some self-discipline. I need, and they would agree to join the Marine Corps without even knowing what MOS they were going to be, and they would go to school the next day all proud. I joined the Marine Corps. And the guy who joined the Air Force, what MOS are you going to be? I don't know. I'm just going to be a Marine.
Yeah, I'm a Marine.
And that was, what MOS, that was the conversation that you had on the way home from MEPS. When you knew what their line scores were,
Sure.
If they were colorblind, and then they joined to be Marines.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Big sense of pride with that.
Big sense of pride. So let's talk about how your career kind of unfurled. How did it look in the beginning? Did it meet the expectations of your father? I mean, he's got to have told you these crazy stories from Vietnam, which, if that didn't scare you, boot camp certainly could have.
When I was about 6 years old, I found up in the attic a Foot Locker that had my dad's Marine Corps stuff in it.
Mm.
And I'm up there rooting around, and I found this. It's kind of like a cruise book or a yearbook from when you went to boot camp. It's red in color, and I found my dad's picture in there. And there's all these. I'm like 6 years old, and I'm like looking at all these pictures of, guys running, doing push-ups, pull-ups, doing the obstacle course, and shooting rifles. Their M1 Garands, and I was like, wow. I was just fascinated. I was really amazed. And when my dad got home from work that night, I remember asking him, Dad, what happens at Paris Island? Okay, I'm like 6 years old. I'm learning how to read. And he berated me. He said, it's Paris Island, you idiot. And he said, and he told me, don't even think about it. You'd never make it. And looking back on it, it's like, wow, that was pretty harsh. But that was my dad. He was a hard-nosed kind of guy. But I think he planted the seed right there. When he told me I couldn't do it, that was like, okay.
I'll show you, old man.
Yeah. And, he got out of staff sergeant. And I remember the day I made gunny, I finally outranked him, and it was like, hey, remember you used to call me shower shoe? You remember you used to call me boot? Well, I'm a gunny now. And he was very proud of my accomplishments. And, he always regretted getting out at 10 years. And I always remember that. And so I really made sure I knew what I was doing, when I was thinking about getting out, so I think, it's one of the reasons I chose to stay in.
Yeah.
Just knowing that my father always regretted it. And always, man, I could have been retired by now, or I'd have been a gunny by now, and that kind of thing.
Well, looking back, now that you've made it this far and you've come, I mean, you're obviously happy with your decision.
Yeah. I couldn't, it just, the reality is you get old and you get tired.
Yeah.
And it's when it's your time, it's your time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's a good time to retire, right?
Yep. Yeah. The only regret is you get old. You know, I loved what I did in the Marine Corps.
Yeah, and it's got to be evolving over time too. And we talked about this. Is just the technology and everything changes so drastically over time. You know, initially when you went in, you know, being a non-commissioned officer in the Marine Corps, what was your experience with developing that skill set?
I can remember, you know, being a junior Marine, a non-rated Marine, before I picked up corporal, before I became an NCO. You know, always, you know, you're just constantly learning. And you had NCOs that you liked and the ones you wanted to be like.
Yeah.
And you had the ones that you didn't like. And you kind of pick and chose which traits you wanted, which characteristics you wanted. And, you know, and at that point in your career, it's really, you're kind of a private soldier, you know, and it's private. The rank private, you know, you're taking care of yourself. And I was really good at taking care of myself. You know, I grew up on a farm where I worked really hard. I got up way earlier than the Marine Corps ever made me get up. I worked all the time, you know, and I joined the Marine Corps and wow, I have weekends off. Wow. After 1630, I can do whatever I want to, you know, and in a lot of ways, it was easier than what I did as a civilian. It wasn't that the work was hard to figure out. It was just hard having the discipline to just do what you were supposed to each and every day.
Sure.
And that came easy for me. You know, accepting a lot of responsibility came easy for me. Growing up on the farm, being around equipment that cost thousands and thousands of dollars, and that's the family's livelihood.
Yes.
You know, I could never afford to be stupid and careless. And that was always drummed into my head by my father, who was he was a stern man. And you know, excelling in the Marine Corps wasn't hard, but it was just hard work. It wasn't hard to figure out what you had to do. It was just hard work, you know, and it came easy. I got a couple meritorious promotions when I was young. And I remember being in Okinawa, Japan when I was a corporal, and I had my own section and we did a deployment to Korea. And I remember just being given the opportunity to really train and to hold Marines accountable so that at the end of the operation, they received a lot of accolades. A lot of, you guys were amazing. And I got to see them enjoy the fruits of their labor. And that's when I realized, you know, I'm good at this.
Yeah. Leading men.
And it became, at that point, I transitioned from being about Luke Converse, taking care of me, and it was more like focus on them.
Yeah. So you decided you wanted to be a leader.
Right. And that was where I really made the transition. I'm going to make this a career. And focusing on taking care of them became the real key to success. I never worried about myself. You know, run your own personal PT program, you know, physical fitness. You better be tough enough to set a good example for them. You know, come to work way before they do. You're setting an example. Work as hard as they do, if not more. You're constantly setting an example for them. Your own standards of conduct. It was all about them. And that just drove me to push myself harder.
Sure. So this was primarily in peacetime, right? I'm assuming you made E4, E5 in the late 80s, early 90s. So pushing into Desert Storm as we're starting to, you know, spin up chronologically, we're starting to spin up into more conflicts. How did you find your position or your time in the Marine Corps changed during, you know, transitioning from peacetime to wartime?
Okay.
What was the big change there for you?
The big change for me was really the kind of unit that I was assigned to during the first Gulf War.
Which was primarily?
I was assigned to, it was called the Joint Communications Support Element. It was at MacDill Air Force Base in Tampa, Florida. And that unit was kind of a communications battalion that was in general support of the entire Department of Defense.
Okay.
But we specialized in a lot of special operations forces, Ranger battalions, jumping in with the 82nd Airborne Division. We could support anybody in the whole DOD, but they only used us. We were very specialized, and they really only used us when there was like a real world exercise or a real world contingency, not an exercise. We really didn't do exercises.
Sure. Yeah.
It was a very specialized unit, and I arrived there I was freshly promoted as a sergeant. It was a unit where they hand selected people.
Okay.
And just very professional, very specialized. And I got chosen to go to Kuwait in July of 1990.
Okay.
So I was already in Kuwait. I was working in the embassy. And there was an officer from the Central Command who was sent there to advise the staff on, okay, we have an idea that Iraq might invade Kuwait. And so I was the communications liaison. So I provided a SATCOM link that went from the embassy in Kuwait back to the war room at the Central Command.
Okay.
And so we were already in place when Iraq invaded Kuwait. And so things got hot really fast because the country basically got overran in about a day.
Yeah.
You know, about the time we heard artillery fire and knew something was happening, there was already small arms fire in the streets.
So you were boots on the ground.
Yeah,
as
we
it
were
was
like
kicking
right
off.
there. But it was a unique. We wore civilian clothes, and we didn't
advertise yourselves.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So we kind of
Rightfully
blended in with the State Department personnel, but and they had the defense attaché office, and there's military guys there. But we were there for a very specialized purpose, and that really was my intro into first like real world. No kidding, there's bullets flying.
Combat situation. That has to be a lot of responsibility since you're the direct.
It was, and our radio was used to update General Schwarzkopf and his staff. Back at MacDill.
Yeah.
And then later, like that was like the first day. And by the second day, they were monitoring our radio communications at the Pentagon.
Yeah.
And so it was a very important communications link, and I was
really
privy to a lot of information.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
As we're piecing together on the ground things that were happening, and just continuously reporting back and given national command authority
so that really
intel on what was going on.
Yeah.
That just really solidified that Marine experience at this point. I mean,
Yeah.
NCO now, you get to be in a real world scenario and really develop those NCO qualities that you're looking for. And so fast forwarding a little bit to that is like, let's talk about how September 11th really changed the course of history for the Marine Corps as well as everybody else. So initially, where were you at this time?
Okay. On September 11th, I was a gunny, and I was the radio chief for the 1st Light Armored Reconnaissance Battalion, which is at Camp Pendleton, part of the 1st Marine Division. And, the 1st MARDIV is just one of our premier frontline units, and it's probably the greatest political statement our country can make is if they deploy the 1st Marine Division. It's like something's going to happen.
Yeah.
It's for real. And I was going through school. I was going through a comm chief school in 29 Palms, California. And I remember I got up that morning and I ran PT, and I came back to my room in the barracks. And I didn't have to be to class till like 8, and it was like 6:30, so it was about 9:30 East Coast time. And I turned the TV on and CNN. So as I'm getting ready, I'm just catching the news. And I'm sitting at the foot of my bed, and I look, and there's like smoke coming out of the World Trade Center towers. And I'm like looking at it and like, what the heck is going on here? And they're talking and they're commenting, and I didn't really think it looked like, okay, a Piper Cub smashed into the side. You couldn't really tell,
Sure,
how big a plane it was or anything. And they had just started reporting, and they're talking, and then all of a sudden it was like there was a flash. You saw another plane fly in, a flash, and it flew right into the other tower. And I always remember whoever was commenting, I think I was watching CNN, and they said, "No way can this be a coincidence.
Yeah.
We're under attack. This has to be a terrorist incident." And it was like, wow. And I remember I just wanted to, I just wanted to like cry because I just knew that my life is going to change.
Quite drastically. And change it did, I'm sure.
Did. Yep.
And what did that look like? What did that change, and how quickly was it happening? I mean, you must have gotten that beeper to go off real quick.
Well, the Marine Corps' initial reaction, we had, we went to Afghanistan first, and there were basically 2 Marine Expeditionary Units, and the Marine Corps has 2. The MU, the Marine Expeditionary Unit, one was in the Mediterranean and the other one was in the Western Pacific.
Yeah.
One's from the East Coast, the other one's from the West Coast, and they kind of married up and they formed a brigade-sized task force that came ashore. And they were actually airlifted into Afghanistan, and they were commanded by then Brigadier General Mattis. And that was kind of his first entry into the big stage. And the Marines performed really, really well. It was a true expeditionary test of our abilities to project power that far inland, something we'd never really done before. And, that was the initial, piece that the Marine Corps had, was that initial, basically we helped to kick the Taliban out of Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Initially, Afghanistan went really well for us. And the whole time, one of my companies from the LAR Battalion was on the West Coast MU. Okay. And so we had people involved. So it was very real. And the whole time, our training tempo just got ratcheted up. And it was, you could kind of read the writing on the wall. Something might happen, and everybody knew something might happen. Nobody knew exactly what, but we're all of a sudden training in earnest, and there's no time to be wasted. And it brought a sense of reality to what we did and how important it was. And that's what I just remember a lot of training. And I was with a light armored reconnaissance battalion, which is, they're kind of our doctrinal mission was to be an armored probe that went ahead of the main body, the infantry regiments in the division.
Yeah.
And so we'd be typically the first to contact, not always the first to engage. If we did engage, it would usually be with supporting arms, artillery or air, and light armored reconnaissance. So we had a very, very important job, and I was the communications chief for the battalion, and communications, radio communications was what made that battalion successful. So I had a very important job.
Invaluable.
And yes.
That's an invaluable position.
If we didn't communicate, we were not going to be successful.
Yeah.
And
so you guys started spinning up for your what I'm assuming is your first deployment it is the first deployment into Iraq, right?
Right.
Which you pushed in with the 1-5 on the initial invasion.
Right. Yes. That spring was the spring of 2002. I got selected for promotion to first sergeant.
Okay.
And in the Marine Corps, when you get selected for first sergeant, you're now a senior enlisted leader, where like in the Army, you'll switch back and forth between your MOS and the billet of first sergeant. In the Marine Corps, it's kind of a permanent type of thing. You'll never go back to being a master sergeant. I would never go back to being a comm chief.
Okay.
And so I'm now a first sergeant, and then the Marine Corps could send me to any kind of unit anywhere in the Marine Corps. And I got selected, and within about a week, I had orders to go to 1-5.
Okay. So just across the street, basically.
Yep.
So
Just the other side of the base. I was still on Camp Pendleton.
So this is your experience with 1-5 now, as far as a senior leader position.
Yes. Yep.
And Going into that unit, what was your assessment?
About 1-5.
About 1-5.
Okay. It was a unit that was kind of already up to strength. They were about 6 months out from a scheduled deployment. And so that's with the Marine Corps, like our scheduled deployment, we were supposed to be the ground combat element for the 31st MU on Okinawa.
Mm-hmm.
And so they bring us up to full strength about 5-6 months out so that we can train as a unit, have all the leadership in place. So you have continuity, you build the teamwork, the camaraderie,
Mm-hmm.
all of the team dynamics
Sure.
Yeah.
that you need to really function and be successful.
So certainly squared away.
Yes.
Certainly
Yes.
very squared
And,
away.
you know, we had a great, battalion staff was, Lieutenant Colonel Padilla, Sergeant Major Jones was a tremendous leader, career infantryman. My company commander was top notch. My predecessor as a first sergeant was a great guy, and did really great work to take care of the company. So I arrived at it with a winning team.
Good.
Mhm.
Yeah. That's helpful.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So being a fresh first sergeant walking into 1-5 as they're preparing to invade Iraq, did you feel that you were ready to take on that responsibility? Did you feel that you were well established?
I was.
Hmm.
I kind of grew up in an infantry battalion.
Okay.
And as a communicator, you get a very well-rounded snapshot of everything the battalion does.
Sure.
Whether it's logistics, whether it's fire support, air support, simple command and control, command structures
Mhm.
of the battalion and the next higher headquarters.
Yeah.
And it's a really being a career communicator really set me up for success in a lot of ways, because I just you get assigned to a lot of different types of units,
Yeah.
and you
So you have
learn.
that 60,000 foot view.
Oh yeah,
of how
you learn
everything
everything
worked.
about the Marine Corps. So I was a
Mm.
really diverse guy, and plus I had that joint command, and that gave me I'm a very unique specimen as far as a leader, because I had an Army company first sergeant. My section chief was a Navy petty officer. I had a Marine gunny who was my little department chief. And so you had all these different influences from the other services.
Mhm.
And again, I could pick and choose the qualities that I liked from each one. So I know I'm a unique character when it comes to the style of leadership.
Mm. Yeah, and what would you say your leadership style is?
I was a recruiter, and I've had that joint experience.
Mm.
The Marine Corps and the Army are very similar. A very hard-nosed type of leadership, a very authoritarian type,
Mm-hmm.
where the other services are more of a laid back, very democratic, hey fellas, this is what we got to get done today kind of approach. And I kind of got to work a little bit of both,
Yeah.
and I remember growing up and being a young Marine, and the company first sergeant was a guy you were terrified of. You never wanted to have to, I was scared of the man. And, I kind of realized I don't want to be a company first sergeant where, if a Marine has a problem that I can help him with, I don't want him to be afraid to talk to me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that's my leadership style right there.
And there's got to be a balance, right?
But there has to be a balance. Yes.
There has to be a balance, and that's such a tricky line to
Mhm.
walk, because especially if you don't have enough discipline,
Right.
look what happens. Like
Yes,
you have
yes.
just
Mhm.
fat, lazy, and complacent.
I
individuals.
had a unique situation. We had a great team within Charlie Company. My company gunny was a former drill instructor,
Mm-hmm.
and he was bald. He was built like an ape. He was very loud, and he was the guy that the Marines were afraid of.
Mm.
And so if I were disciplining a Marine, I could listen to the Marine, he'd tell me what went wrong. Hey, Gunny, come on in here. Come on into my office. tell the gunny what you just told me, and then the Marine was terrified, and so I could be the persuasive. I never had to raise my voice because I had the gunny.
Yeah.
So I used my team to.
Yeah. That is good.
Use your tools, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good one too, is leaning back on the good cop, bad cop routine. Right. But yeah, finding that balance is just so important. You need to have your men being able to come up to you with a problem.
Yes.
And not hide it.
Yes.
I think that's a big thing too, is countless times I was terrified by my NCO. So I was just like, okay, I'm just going to try to cover this up. Maybe not the best approach, right? So finding that balance is just epically important. So let's talk about that invasion and how that responsibility looked for you, which I'm sure was just paramount. And, there's a lot of variables that are just completely unknown. And putting these guys to work and seeing how they executed on target, how is that for you? Seeing this squared away unit and seeing them do what they've been trained to do, knowing the responsibilities of the lives are on kind of your back.
I mentioned that I was a recruiter. My recruiting tour shaped me in a lot of ways. There is nothing like going to pick up a young man at his house, and mom is crying. Dad wants to cry, but he's a man and he is fighting it off. And you have to tell those parents something. You have to set them at ease. And I would always tell them, Mom, Dad, don't worry. He's in good hands. And I had that experience. I was a successful recruiter, so I had that experience enough times. I'll never forget. And when I came back to the operating forces after my recruiting tour, it really drove home the importance of preparing your Marines for combat. There was a new sense of reality to that because, it's all about the man to the left and right of you and unit survival and ultimately keeping your Marines alive and mission accomplishment. But having met Mom and Dad out there in Nowhereville, USA, it made me, it really just drove home the importance of preparation, training, accountability, don't waste time. And it shaped me as a leader, even after, you learn how to lead people into the Marine Corps, but it made me a more efficient leader because I just really grasped how important what my role is. And so at 1-5, again, I want to bring these guys home alive.
Yeah.
I don't want them to, if I've got to yell at them to keep their helmet on because that's what's going to keep them alive, then I'm going to yell at them to keep their helmet on, you just constantly reinforce basic disciplines.
Yeah. And we see that all the time is like, I don't know why these dicks are making us, put on our helmets all the time. I could say that from personal experience, having stepped on an IED and having my iPro on, my sergeant major would sometimes attach himself to us, and every time be in the middle of a firefight and be like, "Where's your iPro? Where's your pro?" And we'd just be like, "Hey, we don't have time for this right now, okay?" And I remember that was the first thing I thought of, when I'm sitting in the hospital and I have my vision, I'm just like, thank God I had my ear pro on. And you have to do that, right? You have to drive it home, even if the guys are going to hate you for it. That's
the biggest part of leadership is you got to be the person who makes the adult decisions, who does what's, makes everybody do what is right, even when it's not popular.
No, it's ultimately your responsibility.
That's what you've got to do. That's what defines a leader right there.
Yeah.
So, obviously they're in good hands, Mom and Dad. you guys go downrange, and how's your experience with that, keeping everybody alive?
I always remember, you always worry about the weak points, and I can remember like sitting with my company commander, and we sat in Kuwait for, I don't know, month and a half. We did what training we could. We kept our gear ready.
Mm-hmm.
We were just kind of poised, waiting for the order to go. And I can remember sitting with my company commander, Captain Blodgett. He was a great guy. And we would look at platoon rosters. And we would know, the strengths of squad leaders, platoon commanders. This lieutenant's a little bit weak, but we got him married up with a strong platoon sergeant.
Mm-hmm.
And you're just you're always tweaking that dynamic. And, and we would just discuss weak points. This guy here concerns me. And I can remember like when we finally first saw combat, all those concerns went away.
Mm-hmm.
Because the Marines, they exploded into action in a way that just, it surprised me, the intensity. And I remember thinking to myself, if I were an Iraqi soldier right now, I would be terrified. I would be throwing down my weapon because these men are going to kill me.
Yeah.
The aggressiveness, but it was a controlled and disciplined aggressiveness. They were careful not to, this is training, not to commit. We're not murderers. We're not there to commit atrocities. We're there to liberate a country. And, they're good American boys with good American values. And, having the discipline to apply the right level of force as it was required, they did it. And I've studied history. I've read a lot about the Marine Corps and its history, and the Marines on Iwo Jima, and you read about these amazing acts of heroism. And I could see all these acts of any one of those Marines was capable of being a Medal of Honor winner, because they were all they just
timing
exploded.
Timing and opportunity.
Yep. They all just exploded into action, and they did the job. And it was like, wow, what did I just see?
Yeah. That's a proud dad moment, I'm sure, for you, right?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. Yep. Knowing that everything that you've done for them up to that point.
It all comes together.
Yeah. Yeah.
And a lot of it, being a Marine, you're constantly being measured against the Marines that came before you.
Sure. Yeah.
So you don't want to disappoint the
chesty,
the chesty pullers, the Marines from Iwo Jima, the Marines from the Chosin Reservoir, and the 5th Marines was there for all of those. We go all the way back to, the First World War and the Moose Argonne offensive, and, the 5th Marine Regiment was a part of all of that.
Yeah.
In World War II, again, 1st Marine Division, 5th Marines, how many different major campaigns were, they distinguished themselves. When an infantry company comes ashore on Guadalcanal with 200 Marines, and at the end of the campaign, 40 of them walk back on the boat.
Yeah.
Wow.
Ooh. Yeah.
That's if they could do that, we can do this.
Yes. Yeah. And now, I mean, I know you'll never consider this for yourself, but you are part of that history now.
Yes.
They have to, the 1-5 currently, it looks back on you guys. Hey, remember they when they did the invasion, remember in 2002 when they went into Iraq, that was us again. That's, you're part of that history now too.
Yes.
And that's, I mean, that's
very, very proud of that history.
You should be.
Those Marines, I feel very honored to be. I was Charlie Company's first sergeant for 2 deployments in a row, which very rarely happens. They wanted to. I was going to be with the battalion for another deployment. We were supposed to just go to Okinawa, but they ended up sending us back to Iraq.
The bait and switch.
Yeah, exactly.
We're going to Japan, boys.
Yeah, and at the
Just
last
kidding.
minute,
Yeah.
in fact, we went to Okinawa and we ended up flying to Iraq from
Oh, that's even worse.
from Okinawa.
That's
Get
kind
your-
of even worse.
yeah.
Get your flip flops on. And
Right. And we did the second deployment, and those guys, the second deployment in a lot of ways it was harder than the first deployment.
Mm.
The first deployment was very kinetic. You knew who the enemy was. If they didn't confront you, they just left us alone.
Okay.
And by the time we deployed in 2004, the things had changed.
Mm.
It was kind of an insurgency.
Yeah.
There was kind of a civil war going on in Iraq, and
Very muddy waters.
both sides of the civil war didn't like Americans.
Yeah.
And so it was a dangerous place, and it was a difficult place.
Mm-hmm.
And I always remember just watching these Marines day after day leave the wire on patrols, and it seemed like every patrol went out had contact.
Man.
Yeah.
I mean, it was we were operating right outside the city of Fallujah, the Sunni Triangle, a very dangerous place, and there were some tough individuals that we were dealing with.
Yeah.
They were tough and they were determined, and they were they were developing skills, the employment of the IED,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah, that changed,
Mhm.
drastically
Yep.
changed the course of the war.
and these guys were, every time they went out, almost it seemed like that we had contact. We had contact, and these guys every day they would saddle up and go out again.
Mm.
And I was never, and then you had the danger, but you also had the, if you wear full combat equipment in Iraq in July,
Yeah.
Yeah.
the elements, the heat,
Oh, yeah. Everything's trying to kill you.
the
Yes.
filth, the living like an animal for months and months on end,
And it was not Kush. You didn't have
No.
chilies back in 2004.
no, there was none of that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sandbags for armor is what
Yeah.
you guys had.
yeah.
And so can you talk to me about a just resonating, challenging day as far as, a patrol that came back, didn't go as planned, something that really rings out to you in the history of 1-5 Marines?
Okay. 5 April 2004. My company was operating out of Abu Ghraib prison.
Hmm.
And we had nothing to do with the operations within the prison, but we were responsible for the battle space around the prison.
Hmm.
And the prison was getting rocketed and mortared like on a daily basis.
Sure.
And it was a huge target. It was very well lit, and it was easy for them to hit. And sadly, it was usually if anyone was killed, it was the Iraqi prisoners.
Yeah, they're just killing. That's what
Yeah.
makes no sense. Did they know they were bombing their own people?
Mhm.
Yeah.
But
Civil.
we were playing this cat and mouse game with the guys that were firing rockets and mortars at us.
Yeah.
And we were going to get them. Sooner or later, we're going to get these guys. And there was one day, we got rocketed. We responded. And we kind of had a situation where a complex ambush that was initiated by an IED. And we lost one blast of a medium machine gun. We lost 4 Marines. Happened like instantaneously.
Ugh.
And I always remember, that was the first time we lost anybody. And, I always remember the Marines, everybody's sad, but they're angry at the same time. But it's a controlled anger. It's a disciplined anger. And being on the prison, which was primarily ran by the Army, they had an Army, kind of a command psychologist, this doctor who specialized in, counseling Marines, counseling service members through like any kind of a traumatic event. Well, she came over like the next day to where we were billeted, and she talked to me, and she wanted to know if she could talk to, the guys that were out on that patrol, if they need to talk. She wanted to make her services available. She was an Army major, and she had, this is what her job was. And I told her that they weren't here. They were out on patrol. This is like the very next day.
Yeah.
And she just couldn't believe that they're where?
Yeah, I bet that blew her mind.
They're back out. They're on patrol.
Yeah, and that's how it is.
That's how it is.
That's how it is.
That's how it is.
There's no, turn in your badge and gun and
Right.
let's go to the psych clinic.
Yeah.
No.
We're not going to stand down for 2 weeks and lick our wounds. It was like...
That is therapy, actually, right?
It
that
actually
controlled
is.
anger
Yes.
needs to be put to
Yep.
work.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, let's not be coy about it either. We know that's what Marines want to do. As a result of that, that's what we would all want to do. We want to go out. We want to find who did this, and we want to,
Destroy the enemy.
we want to, show them that they made a serious mistake, right? We've all been in that position ourselves. It's, I think that's exactly what we would want to do, right?
But again, just to see them go out again,
Yeah,
day after day
continually.
on these patrols, and we did well.
Yeah,
we took our licks, but
sure.
we delivered.
Dished
too.
him back in
Tenfold.
Manyfold.
escalation of
Manyfold,
force.
yes.
Absolutely. So that was that's April 5th. Difficult day. Any other challenging days that deployment?
That's the one that was the biggest.
Just resonates deeply. Yeah,
we didn't lose any more Marines, but we had a lot of Marines get wounded and medevaced out of theater. A lot of walking wounded that were fixed up in country.
It's so baffling
finished
to me
the deployment.
the capabilities, of our U.S. military, not just Marines, but U.S. Military in general, to be able to dish that out to the enemy and take a relatively small amount of loss.
Yeah.
It just goes to show how much, love, effort, and just training goes into each and every single service member out there.
Incredibly effective.
So that, despite losing those Marines, you have to take tremendous pride in being able to bring back so many.
Yeah.
How does that feel? Like, it's just got to resonate too. But it's kind of funny is that those are the ones that stand out the most. That's the only ones we could think about, right?
Yeah, I consider us. We were very fortunate. There were so many close calls and times when, especially when dealing with the IED, or you come under fire, and you have rounds impact right beside you. Yeah. It's kind of like, wow, how close was that?
Just inches. And you laugh about it, right? That's the crazy thing is you just...
I used to go out on patrols with the squads, and just kind of a presence thing. I wasn't there to lead the squad. I would tell the squad leader, tuck me in. I'm a good shot with the M16, and I just wanted to be there for the Marines and share their pain, share their fear, and be a good leader. And I always remember, going on patrols, and I remember there were times where you could just feel it wasn't right, and you just in an urban environment, where I think I'm in somebody's sights right now, but I don't know where they are, but they're out there, and everybody could sense it. And at this point too, we were mentoring and training a company of, they were called the ICDC, Iraqi Civil Defense Force. ICDC Corps, Iraqi Civil Defense Corps. And
that sounds right.
We would take those guys on because right after that they transitioned into the Iraqi National Guard.
Too many
ING.
acronyms at the end of the day.
Yeah. and plus this is 20 years ago.
20 years ago,
Yeah.
Yeah. And those guys had an innate sense. They knew when something was, you're walking down a street and there's kids, life, businesses being conducted. The patrol hangs a left, and all of a sudden it's like complete
Just dead.
quiet. And it's like, uh-oh.
Something's wrong. Yeah.
And you can, it's about to happen.
Yeah.
And then it doesn't, but you go through that, but the Marines, they would go out over and over and over again and face this.
You know what it is as well, and as well as is they're measuring you up. And most of the time they're like, we ain't messing with that.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's a small contingent, maybe, but for the most part, I don't want to fight the Marines, like you said. They're
Right,
gonna throw
exactly.
Let's back up.
Yep. Well-trained, aggressive, good marksman. They can bring a tremendous amount of firepower, even just a dismounted squad-sized patrol.
It's incredible. It's incredible.
Lugging an AT-4 along.
Yeah.
The M203, M240 Golf, the medium machine gun, the SAW.
Yeah.
And they're all organic to that rifle platoon, rifle squad. So it's a lot of firepower.
Not to be trifled with.
Yep. And it's disciplined firepower.
Yeah.
Disciplined and accurate and
Violence of action, right?
So that's crazy. I mean, being a Marine leader is an absolutely brilliant trait to have nowadays, I'm sure. So let's talk about what brings us here at this Reunite the Brave special event that we're doing. First and foremost, how did you hear about it? Like, what did you think? What do you think of the whole thing?
Charlie Company had done 2 company-sized reunions prior to this. We did one in 2015, which commemorated 15 years. 2015, 10 years. 10 years from the time we left Iraq.
Okay.
So it would have been 2005. 10 years later, 2015, we had a reunion. This is after they did the 3rd deployment. About 1/3 of Charlie Company and the other line companies in 1-5, that this is the model. We got what we called a dump from the School of Infantry that fleshed us out, that made us brought us up to full strength right before the first deployment to Iraq. Those guys that got there, we were in the desert in northern Kuwait waiting to cross the line of departure. This was basically their first field op outside of the School of Infantry. Things happened really fast for these young men. They were 6 months before that, they were like seniors in high school.
Yeah.
And here they are sitting in the desert, waiting to go.
Quick turnaround.
And it's a lot of time to sit and think about what's going to happen. And what we've talked, they performed admirably. Now these guys came back for 6 months, back to Camp Pendleton, redeployed for another 7 months to Iraq, came back to Camp Pendleton for about 6 months, redeployed again to the city of Ramadi, which was even more dangerous than what we dealt with in 2004. And these guys, the 3-peat guys, the guys that got all 3 deployments in one enlistment, what these kids went through, what these young men went through was, and when they came back to the States after that 3rd deployment, now keep in mind, this is a full 1/3 of the company. They had enough time to turn their gear in, do their final physical, and get out. And that's fast.
Very full 4 years.
And so all of a sudden, these guys are back on the street, and they're back amongst civilians.
With all that charged energy.
Yes. And Charlie Company did well. And taking care of our own. This is right about the time when social media was starting to become a hit, 2005-ish. And the Marines kept in touch with each other, communicated, but I know a lot of them suffered.
Yeah.
It was, just, unfortunate.
It is.
And man, I love those guys, and I'm so proud of them. But fast forward to about 2014 or so, one of them sent me a text, like, First Sergeant, can we do a reunion? We can do whatever we want.
Hell yeah, we can.
And so we organized this reunion, and we did it in Las Vegas, and it had close to 200 people total that came to this reunion, and it was amazing. It was just incredible to watch these guys come together. It was like they never it's like they picked up right where they left off.
Yeah.
And they were just on fire. They were like walking on cloud nine for months afterwards. I'd get these texts. We kind of agreed to a 5-year rhythm for a company reunion. So 2015, next one's in 2020. 6 months later, I'm getting, First Sergeant, do you think we could maybe do another one like next year? It's like, well, we agreed on 2005. Because the reality is, these guys are all middle-aged guys now, and they have mortgages and jobs, and they can't just take off and go to a reunion every year, consume the whole family vacation for you and your boys. That doesn't go over too well. But witnessing that in 2015, so we had it planned for 2020. COVID got in the way.
Sure. Yeah.
Las Vegas shut down. And so we postponed it for a year. So we ended up doing it in 2021. And the 2021 reunion, I invited Lieutenant Colonel Padilla, now Major General Padilla, and he agreed to come. But he had a problem with his heart and had to undergo a surgery. And so he was unable to go. But I had a conversation with him about how excited I was about this reunion. And he had just retired and was kind of settling into his civilianized, now he's got some time to reflect.
Yeah.
As a general officer.
Yeah.
The amount of responsibility and the workload that those guys endure is just hard to fathom. And now he's freshly retired and he's got some time to reflect. And I had this conversation with him, and I remember I talked to him for about an hour and a half on the phone one day. And I had invited him, and we had this conversation when he told me he couldn't come. But he was also kind of opening up to the idea of, we need to do this as a battalion. And it started to happen. And at first I didn't really want to get involved in it because I knew the workload and I knew the headaches.
Absolutely.
The logistics.
And I was hoping someone else would step up, and other people did step up and really took on the bulk of the planning and preparation and the work. I was able to assist and kind of supplement and augment the team. But it was initially General Padilla had the idea, let's do this as a battalion, because the companies were out doing their own thing. And we could get by without ever doing a battalion evolution like this. But when the colonel he's a general now, General Padilla got involved, and it was like, all right, yeah, let's do this. And you had the right characters on this kind of team that was kind of formed out of nothing. Just some guys who thought, yeah, this would be a neat idea.
Yeah. And
we'd all had successful company reunions. Like, yeah, we should do this as a battalion.
Yeah. And
we also, when they decided on Camp Pendleton, one of the strengths of going back to Camp Pendleton is kind of like a pilgrimage. You're going back to the motherland. You're going home. And that's powerful. But you also have an active duty 1st Battalion, 5th Marines.
Yeah.
They're at Camp Pendleton, full of young Marines who've never seen combat. And we get to pull them into our reunion.
Wow.
And so those guys are going to be at the big banquet. They're going to be there when we have the memorial service on Camp Pendleton. And they get to experience and meet and talk with us. And, I kind of mentioned earlier that, the strength of the Marine Corps is the standards that were set by the Marines that came before you.
Yeah.
And you can't betray that. That's our responsibility. We have to maintain that reputation.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all, so we're kind of indoctrinating the next generation. Someday they're going to see combat.
Mm-hmm.
And when they go, they're going to explode into action. Why? Because they're Marines. It's what they do.
It's incredible. Incredible. Well, really appreciate you for coming out here and sharing your story. We're super excited to get this Reunite the Brave going for 1-5 Marines. Our next episodes, we're going to have a few of your junior NCOs come on board and talk about their experiences on the ground and what it's like reintegrating into society and seeing this come together and what it means for them to be with their fellow Marines. So really appreciate you and your service. You've done, an incredible testament to the Marine Corps and absolutely inspiring.
Thank you. Thanks for being here for us.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Appreciate what you guys are doing.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, thank you very much for joining us today and for opening up too. I know we touched on some good topics today, so thank you.
Good to go. Thank you.
This has been the Medevac Podcast, ladies and gentlemen. Don't forget to check out medevacpodcast.com. You can view all of our episodes there. You can interact with myself and Dave on the website, as well as our social media at Medevac Podcast. It is the easiest way to reach us. Shoot us a DM, leave a comment, let us know what you want to hear and see.
Thank you.
That's it.
Take
Bye.
care.